Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very, very warm welcome to all of you to yet another of Highr's weekly webinars. My name is Pallavi Dwivedi, and I'm the founder of Highr, and I welcome all of you to our wonderful, exciting discussion this evening. I would like to thank all of you who've consistently been joining us every week, every Friday, sending in your submissions, interacting with the panelists, with one another, and adding to what has now become a fantastic exchange of knowledge, information, experiences, ideas amongst educators from across the world. So welcome back to those of you who are joining us again. And to those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome to Highr. Highr is an online live learning community for educators from around the world. We have been putting up a lot of workshops and webinars for the last 8 months now to help teachers upskill their classroom teaching practice. Every week, we bring you a new panel of experts who talk to you about exciting things that they themselves are doing in their own classrooms and are eager to share with all of you because these have worked for them and they hope that they're working for you as well. So before I begin today's session, I'm very quickly going to take all of you over our housekeeping rules for this session. During this webinar, the panelists are not going to be able to see you. We also do not use the raise your hand feature, but we do expect all of you to use the chat and the Q&A box as much as you'd like. Talk to one another, share your ideas, interact with each other. We encourage all sorts of healthy debate, but we do expect and request all of you to talk to one another with being mindful of one another's sentiments and to be kind to each other. I think the world needs as much kindness as it can get at this point in time. Something that all of you ask us, webinar recordings and PPTs, as always, will be sent across to all registered participants. Webinar recordings will also be available on our YouTube channel, and the participants and the panelist presentations will also be available in the resource section on our website. The part which all of you look forward to the most about the certificates, we do offer certificates for our webinars, but as always, there is a catch. So if you do want a certificate for our webinars, here's what you need to do. You need to tell us what you learned in today's session. And you can do that in one of the 3 ways that you can see on my screen. You can either send us a sketch note or a drawing depicting your key takeaways from this session. You can send us a classroom activity or an idea of something that you'd like to do with your students in your own classroom, which is inspired by what you learned in today's session. You can also send us a 150-word reflection on an idea that you found most interesting or that you most disagree with as well. We're okay with listening to disagreements as well. So please feel free to tell us things that you didn't like about what the panelists said today. I'm sure they're not going to take that to heart, right? Very importantly, a screenshot of panelist presentations or simply regurgitating what the panelists have said today will not qualify as a submission for a certificate. Get creative, teachers. Tell us what you learned. Tell us what you took away from today's session. Tell us how it changed your teaching practice, and show us how you've actually engaged with the ideas that panelists are putting up in today's sessions. Just to show you what some of you have been sending us over the last week, and this is now the announcement for this week's super contributors. These are all the teachers who sent us their submissions from last week's webinar. I'm very, very happy to announce this week's super contributors. Arpita Mukherjee Ghosh, who's from Billabong High International School, Mumbai. Shehnaz Khan from Shiv Nadar School, Noida. We have Aarti Fulari from Sanskriti School, Delhi. We have Fatima Sabina from SRV International School, Rasipuram. We have Jennifer Cruz from Hope Christian High School, Manila. and to just very quickly take you all over what all of these wonderful educators have sent in. Of course, you can check out their contributions, which have been posted on the Facebook group as well as on our other social media channels already. So Arpita sent us this beautiful reflection on how she's going to, she's teaching Shylock, she's teaching Shakespeare to her class, and she's reflected on last week's session to talk to us about how she is going to adapt some of her learnings from there to focus on the conversations around the build-up in the play, around the way in which the characters are described and treated in the play. And we also have Shehnaz Khan, who sent us a fantastic activity where she's going to be looking at marginalized communities and focus on equity in her classroom. And she wants students to be able to understand power dynamics by looking at the way in which class dynamics work. And she's going to be using student voice. She's going to be amplifying student voice by using these activities that she's put out. So you guys must go and take a look at what Shehnaz has put out for her class. We also have two very beautiful sketch notes, which one of them is by Fatima Sabina and the other one is by Aarti Fulari, both talking about how they can help their students become more effective communicators and encourage student voice and student dialogue in the classroom. And last but not the least, again, a beautiful sketch note looking at the way in which teachers can become more effective communicators and conversation enablers in their own classrooms. So those are our super contributors from last week's session. Thank you very much, teachers, for these wonderful submissions, and we hope to see more of these this week as well. And just to talk a little bit about this session for today, service learning and community action for remote classrooms. How is it that we as educators can incorporate service learning as a part of the experiences that we design for our students? How is it that we can engage students in community action at this point in time when everybody is working remotely, when we're in the middle of a pandemic? What are some of the opportunities that this pandemic has provided for service learning as well as community action? And we're going to be talking to our wonderful panelists today and understand from them how they've been doing this seemingly tedious task in their own classrooms remotely, and what are some of their takeaways from interacting with their own classes, with their own colleagues, with other educators on how service learning can be made possible and should be made possible at this very, very crucial point in time for all of us as a global community. This session fits very well into the practicing professionalism and designing instruction domains of Highr's Big Four of quality teaching. As those of you who've been with us before know, everything that we do at Highr fits into the Big Four of quality teaching, where we're either looking at planning for classroom delivery or designing instruction or managing student progress or practicing professionalism. And in today's session, we're going to be doing a little bit of how you as teachers can contribute to your wider school communities, your local communities, and perhaps even to the world at large, and how you can engage your students in doing the same. Along with that, of course, we're focusing on designing instruction. So how do we go about designing these experiences for our students, and what sort of skills does that kind of design process call for on our part as teachers? So to talk about all of these wonderful things today, we have with us, first up, Lawrence Myers. Lawrence is a K-12 service learning coordinator at the American School of Dubai. He's also the learning facilitator for Compass Education. Welcome, Lawrence, and thank you so much for joining us for this evening's conversation. Next up, we have with us Suji Highr. Suji is an educational consultant for global citizenship and service. She's also working with Mad Travel and Orenda Learning, and Suji is going to bring with her all of her consulting experiences for looking at how teachers in classrooms can design learning experiences for students to develop values of global citizenship and service. So thank you for being with us today, Suji, and welcome aboard. Last but not the least, we have from all the way across the world. From the Ivory Coast, we have Maipelo Ngusa. Maipelo is the Service Learning and IB-CAS Coordinator at the International Community School of Abidjan. And Maipelo is going to be sharing with us how her school has engaged in some really interesting community service and service learning activities. So that's our panel for this evening, ladies and gentlemen. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over the floor to our first panelist, Lawrence. Lawrence, take it away.
Thank you very, very much, first of all, to Pallavi and Highr, of course, for this amazing opportunity. I'm looking at the number of participants and I'm thinking to myself, truth is, typically in a school setting, you only have maybe 5 or 10 people in one space. So the power of technology has been very impressive. And just what we're going through today is, I think, in many ways, the silver lining of the opportunities that we have. So let me just take a moment to share my screen, and hopefully this all works without too much trouble. And let me go to there. Okay, I hope everybody can see. And I will flip over to the next slide. There we are. Okay, so when we're talking about service learning, at least in my context, I do like to kind of take pride in the fact that when kids ask me what I do for a living, I'm able to say I help kids and adults try to do what they can to make the world a better place. And doesn't that really sound pretty cool as a job description? So I am one of the very fortunate full-time service learning coordinators around the world. And in that opportunity, I've been able to delve perhaps a little bit deeper just because I have the time to do so in service learning. So I like to start with a why. And I always think that when educators are asked, what are you doing and why are you doing it, that it's important that we don't just stop with, for example, I'm an English teacher, or I am a history teacher, or I am a physical education teacher. In the end, there has to be a bigger why, and the why shouldn't be just to get a kid to university, but it should be to build characteristics and build dispositions and build skills in students to be able to make the world a better place, even if it is a big hoax. Let's move on just a little bit. The other piece of what I like to start with is talking about the future, and specifically the idea that as we stand or mingle around our students in class, that really we need to give the tools to the kids to be able to build their own future. We often like to say, well, we're teaching the leaders of tomorrow. Well, my argument is that the truth is that the leaders of tomorrow actually begin their process today. Just like an NBA player doesn't pick up a basketball after they finish high school. If you are to change mindsets, if you are to change the world for a better, you have to give those opportunities to students at a very young age. And at our school, we start that at the age of approximately 4, which is when the first students come in. And they all begin to do their part to building a future that we can call our own, and a future that is hopefully sustainable, and a future that has built a sense of kindness and a sense of service-mindedness to our community that can extend beyond the school, of course, and towards the entire world at large. So how wonderful that I have a job like this, and that I'm able to work with educators around the world, and of course the students at our school, in order to move in that direction. So I wanted to start just with an example. I understand that some people will come with varying experience in terms of service learning and what it represents. And I wanted to kind of separate service learning from maybe community service. Community service is often done in many places, and certainly has a very big value. But if I'm walking down a beach and this picture is what I see, I have options. I can stop, for example, and I can learn about this beach, or I can sit in my classroom and I can talk about how much dirt there is on this beach and what a big problem it is. I can also talk about and learn with the children about doing something about it. So what do people do about it? Well, they try to clean them, they try to increase awareness, things like that. So that's also important, and that's certainly a good step in the right direction. I can also do something, and that's typically what community service would be. Community service would be essentially an experience to try to better this picture, right? So that the picture itself would look like a more beautiful beach, maybe cleaner beach. Or the other possibility is to actually put the children in a situation where by doing, they can learn a lot more. So in our particular case, if we were to use this beach as a service learning experience, it would look more along the lines of, okay, let's clean that beach, which is great. But by cleaning the beach, we haven't actually solved the problem because there's going to be trash a week later. So how do we actually delve into that problem? What kind of an analysis do we need to go through to be able to get these children to think more in terms of a solution mindset and actually say, okay, well, I'm going to clean the beach, but in so doing, I'm going to analyze the process. I'm going to use potentially systems thinking tools to get involved in how did this beach get here and what might be the best outlet in terms of my action to potentially try to address this specific issue. So the true depth and root of service learning is in what I just described. So yeah, of course you're doing something and you're trying to generate a positive, but you're also learning very deeply about what it is that your topic is. In our particular case, we use this little diagram on the right side. It's a variation of a very similar design that's used, IPART it's called in the United States at least. But you'll notice the list on the left, if you were to eliminate the word service learning, I'm hoping that all of those descriptors would actually describe just really good learning. And a lot of times we talk about that. And a lot of times we actually lose people because we use the terminology service learning. So somebody suddenly believes that, okay, I'm a math teacher, so this does not apply to me because I'm not a service learning teacher, I'm a math teacher. But the truth is that in math, you can invite student agency. You can center it on learning outcomes, and you should. You should be addressing authentic needs. Certainly, we want relevance for everything that our students do. And it should involve some reflection. I mean, basically everything on the left side is just really good teaching. And on the right side is just the process that we use, which is very similar to the IB, also a process that's used for service learning. We've added a few little extra reflections in there. But certainly it's starting with the curriculum and moving beyond that. So that experience of cleaning the beach doesn't end with cleaning the beach and just feeling good about it, moving on, and then perhaps coming to the same beach the next week to clean up again. The idea is how do we really delve deep into the topic and how do we come up with solutions that are within the leverage and the power of students. And of course, that leverage and power will differ depending on the age of the kids. Just like again in basketball, you're not going to expect the future basketball player to be dunking at the age of 6. First, they've got to learn how to dribble, perhaps roll over the ball when they're younger, you know, those kind of things. So it's one step at a time. In our particular case, we've, of course, run into this whole new dynamic. The entire world has been challenged in how education is taking place. And what we found is really, as we've rushed, and in our particular case, we have the capacity online to teach properly, but we've all rushed into a very asynchronous, isolated sometimes, indirect, and very self-directed, like student-engaged learning, which is very different from what we typically do sometimes as teachers. However, there's a silver lining. Here's one of our garden teachers doing a cooking class, for example, using all sorts of technology here to try to get through to the kids, talking about specifically a recipe having to do with, I think, Italian food that particular day. So there are a lot of good opportunities that COVID also provides. And in our particular case, we are an urban school. We live in a very large urban city. I'm in Dubai at the moment. And of course, when we had lockdown for close to a month, which was a complete and total lockdown, basically living in our living rooms and homes for an entire month, we really were challenged on how we're going to move forward. So I'm just offering a few examples of what we specifically did. In some cases, we had proper classroom teaching, but instead of doing it in a more collaborative face-to-face setting, we kind of outsourced it to the home, which was great because it allowed us to build community with the parents and to build community with the family and the home front. So really it became a personal issue. We also took a few topics in terms of a longer term projection. So the boy on the top right, for example, decided that he would create a seed bank. It was not something that was possible at that particular moment in time because we were all at home. But in his particular case, he decided, okay, I'm going to invest my time and my energy so that we can try to provide opportunities for people in the future. And as it turns out, the future is now, and we are handing out seeds now for people to plant in their gardens and so on and so forth. And in so doing, talking about, of course, the value of nature specifically. We are in the desert, so those are interesting conversations to have. And the bottom piece is just the ongoing and new online collaborations with other schools that we've had opportunities to do. The particular image is of a combination of our school with the American Community School in Abu Dhabi, creating a new organization that we hope will continue, called the UAE Schools Changemakers Collaborative. And they're going to be kind of focusing as we move forward for the next couple of years. And then finally, other things just from home. We had students who delved in social entrepreneurship and trying to make things from home and being active, because of course they needed to come up with other options than just looking at screens. We also had students teaching other students. In this particular case, you'll notice there's a foot on this picture. That's supposed to actually signify a footprint, so an earth footprint. So this is actually a sustainability lesson that allows the other kids to recognize the value of their decisions as consumers and users in the environmental setting and sustainability. And finally, also, of course, using the power of social media. I don't know if you guys know Dixie D'Amelio, I think is her name. My daughters do all her little TikTok dances every other minute of the day. So this girl is, I think, 16, and she has 90 million people following her. So the power of teenagers is actually quite impressive if you really tap into that side of their potential service to themselves, their family, their community, and to humanity in general. So I think I'm going to stop there. I don't know, Pallavi, if you can give me a little bit of maybe guidance in terms of the questions and answers.
Yes,
should I be answering those right now?
Absolutely. So we have a couple of questions that came in from the Facebook group particularly. Mm-hmm. So the one question, Lawrence, which I think a lot of community learning, so service learning and community action teachers always asked is, how do we make this more accessible for students at primary school levels, particularly given the risks involved right now? How do we facilitate conversations, engagement, having kids go out there and actually experience something for themselves, because that's really where the learning happens, you know? So how do we create safe experiences for kids at this point in time?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question too. I think in our particular situation, what it's done is it's really required children to have deep conversations, mostly with parents, to be honest. Obviously, they're coming from school, but you do need to embrace the power and connection to a family member. And I think in that way, in many ways, it's almost like the kid has an opportunity to influence a family, like the parents. So it's like a reverse influence. So those conversations are really deep, I think. But also the other part for me is it's a good opportunity. Often people have a lot of issues even within their own neighborhood, sometimes even in their own home. Like in the picture that I showed with the birdhouses, for example, that was a first grade unit that had to do essentially with nature and animals. And so the idea was, how can we support the nature around us? So it was just kind of a small little action. Of course, they're first graders, right? So they're 5 years old. It's not, we're not expecting them to change the entire world, but it's very important that they have that mindset of, I can actually do something for someone larger than me. So in this case, it was the birds. And so the conversation was, well, what can we do as a class community? But obviously we're all at home. So how can we extend that conversation and the doing part to the home experience? So really what it came up with was, in our case, like 130 children all making little homes for the resident birds in their particular community.
Oh, that's absolutely lovely. There's one other question that I thought was, this is an important one because it's asking for the difference between the PYP exhibition and where, you know, you're looking at documenting how students have done certain projects over a period of time. And how do we approach service learning differently from the PYP exhibition, or are there ways in which we can, you know, do them both in tandem? How does that work?
Okay, I need to confess that my school is not an IB school. So the PYP exhibition is not something I typically have to deal with in a dynamic. We do have exhibition-like experiences, however. I don't know if you remember the cycle that we had, but the last kind of step was the demonstration piece. A really big and very powerful piece of learning is to be able to demonstrate and try to do for someone external to the class. So really it's not your typical learning of, here's Pallavi and she's done her assignment and she's handed it into me and now I grade it and give it back to her and she says, oh yeah, I got this score. Really the scores are secondary. And really what it's all about is, okay, Pallavi, that's great what you want to do, but you need to extend yourself external to self, to class, to me, and try to do a good and support something that's bigger. And then by the same token, the demonstration is hugely important. So the expo is not only about the kids, of course, demonstrating their skills and what they've learned and how they've addressed things, but it's also about generating a community ethos of recognizing just how many examples of this we have in our community. And for those who aren't directly involved, to give them an impression of, wow, in this case, pretty young kids can do pretty amazing things, again, in a developmentally appropriate level. And so, yeah, by all means, an exhibition. Again, we don't use that format exactly or that wording in our school, but the exhibition is hugely important to celebrate. We don't use it as an assessment so much as a celebration of learning. And I think it's important for the kids to not be stressed. I mean, by that point, you should just be really happy with what you've accomplished or what you've learned if the accomplishment wasn't exactly as planned, right? Because we also talk about failure being a learning experience too. So that's fair.
Very, very right. And I think that is in very many senses also what the PYP exhibition tries to achieve as well. And I think to add to what you just said, Lawrence, and this might feed back into this question as well that that this teacher was asking, we don't need to look at service learning as a separate curriculum that needs to be run. It can very well be incorporated into whatever it is that you're teaching otherwise in your classrooms as well. And as such, it can very well feed into what a student or what the PYP exhibition does towards the end of that academic year. So it could just be a culmination of what the different kinds of projects the student has undertaken over a period of time. And I think there was another question to this effect where a teacher was asking whether you do have, and this I'd open this out to everybody else on the panel as well, that do you all have a separate service learning curriculum, or is it that it's integrated? And is it a choice that students have? How does this work? Maipelo, at your school, Suji, in your experience at various other schools that you have consulted with?
All right, so for me, service learning is actually integrated into the curriculum. So it's used as a teaching and learning strategy. So that way students are learning through service learning. So they're applying their learning by doing the service learning experience. And we don't have a specific curriculum. We are just following some of the standards that Suji is going to talk about and using those standards to apply learning in authentic context.
Same. When I was the elementary service learning coordinator at ISKL and I got to work with Lawrence, there was no separate unit. And what we would usually do is do an analysis of a particular unit and see where the natural occurrence of service would be. And then just make sure that it followed the proper steps for service learning and meet best practice as much as possible and not do it separately. But there were extracurricular events also for service, and that's a whole nother, story. But curricularly, I think it should be integrated for more impact.
Absolutely. And that is exactly what the PYP does as well, where service learning is actually integrated into the curriculum. So what you would see at an exhibition is actually what has come out of all of these different experiences that have been built into all the different classroom learning opportunities that students ordinarily would have. It's not a separate component. It's not separate activities that are being documented. It's what has been done within the classroom as is. So it's integrated into the curriculum for the PYP as well.
Pallavi, can I just add something here? I'm sorry.
Yes,
So
please.
the way we describe it at our school is that really service learning, and this goes very closely to what Suji and Maipelo said. Service learning is a how, it's not a what. So essentially, you can use service learning in any kind of curriculum. But the beauty of service learning, it's a little bit similar to project-based learning, but in my opinion, it's project-based learning. So it's inquiry, it's project-based learning plus. So the plus part is there's a much bigger kind of community element to it. So the project-based learning can be service learning, but service learning is almost always somewhat project-based learning like. But what it also does is a very natural fit, and right now that's where kind of we are as a school, is it very naturally brings multiple curricula together. Right. So for example, you can have a math teacher that wants to focus on data collection and analysis and making tables and kind of skill building of that kind of thing. You might have an English teacher that wants to focus on persuasive writing, for example, or interviewing or research techniques. And you might have a social studies teacher that has that beach and is talking about pollution. So now you've brought in potentially multiple people to deal with kind of that multi-dimensional element, which makes it a lot more authentic as well.
Absolutely, and there's so much scope even in the MYP and in the DP for service learning, particularly with the personal project in the MYP. When we're looking at all of your Group 5 presentations for the DP, there's so much that one can incorporate when it comes to service learning. All of our interdisciplinary units, the IDUs within the MYP, also can factor in, just like Lawrence gave an example at the moment just now, where different subjects can come together and try and have students experience a community engagement activity for the interdisciplinary unit, and have service learning as the learning outcome for that particular IDU as well. So on that note, there's lots of other interesting questions coming in. I'm going to hand over to Suji and take some of the rest of these questions after Suji's made her comments. And I do know that one of the questions will lead directly into what Suji is going to be talking about, which is that what are the different skills that children can develop by doing service learning. So Suji, over to you on that note.
Okay, I'm gonna do my presentation, I hope, and I hope you all can see this in a second. So I just wanted to give a little background, because I know a lot of the teachers we're talking with today are in India, and that's very dear to my heart. I was born in New Delhi and I grew up there until I was 7, and then I've moved around the entire world since then. And I was a librarian for a long time. And then when I was at the International School of Kuala Lumpur, I was lucky enough to work as the service learning coordinator and sustainability coordinator for the elementary school. And then I just fell in love with it and loved what I got to do. And so that leads me to this slide, because one thing I really find is a very compelling reason also to learn through service is that children of all ages and adults as well really respond well, I feel, when they have a purpose, when they feel that they're making a contribution to something larger than themselves, like Lawrence said, something outside themselves. And sadly, I think that for a lot of kids in our students' situations, there's not a lot of purpose. Like I say this about my sons, like up until now, if they didn't exist, as much as I love them in my life would go on. They're not farming for me. They're not, they don't have this sort of like reason for or contributing naturally in our family settings anymore. We have a place to live, we have plenty of money, they go on holidays, but there's not this sense of like a driving purpose to which they can apply themselves. And I think that they actually love it. They love when they're given a task that they know, and they're smart. They can tell when it's not genuine. And when they're given a task that really fits into a larger project, a larger purpose, a larger cause, I think it really engages them, and they love it. And I think that we can't give them these experiences because then again, it's not their purpose. It's not their contribution. It's us again giving them something like an assignment or dinner. So I think that when we engage in service and learning through service with kids, that it's really important for us to remember that they love, I think they really have a lot of drive when they see that they're contributing to something that's real and it's making a difference. So that's my drive sometimes. And when I'm thinking about services, like how do we get these kids to have a sense of purpose? So I work at Orenda Learning. That's one of my positions. And what I'd like to do is just be silent for a couple minutes for you visual learners and let you read the definition of service that we use at Orenda. So now that you visual learners have hopefully absorbed that, I'd like everybody, if you're an auditory learner or not an auditory learner, to just close your eyes. I know that's weird, and I'll read it out loud for auditory learners. So service is the voluntary act of addressing community needs and ethically working towards sustainable solutions, a process that involves active consultation and collaboration among stakeholders, leading to reciprocal, respectful, and open-hearted partnerships. So that's kind of the gold standard that we hold at Orenda when we speak of service. So I'd like you all to just take a second here and think about service. Lawrence has been giving us some really nice examples. You've seen people on Facebook, or maybe you've done a beach cleanup recently, so I'd like you to just take a moment and think about what the key elements, what would service not be if we didn't do this? Like, how would it not be good service if we didn't include this thing? And now we're going to do what Lawrence taught me, which is we're going to do a scatterfall. So when you think of service, think of a word or a phrase or a sentence and type it into the chat, but don't hit send. And then I'm going to just give you a little bit of time to think, and then I'll say go, and you can press send, and we'll all have a look at what each other is thinking about the key elements of best practice. And I know there's a lot of you, so it's going to be scrolling for a lot, but we've got lots of time later to scroll through and have a look. So think about what is service made up of? And remember to type it in your chat. And now let's see if we break chat with this many responses. I'll count down from 3. 3, 2, 1, hit send. That should be very interesting, and I'll have a look for sure when I'm not presenting. So again, some of the elements that we consider as key in service is just what Lawrence showed you in that chart, which comes from the CAS stages mostly, but is influenced by obviously other service thinkers. There's investigation, planning, preparation, action, demonstration, and reflection. Reflection goes throughout. And so, Pallavi was mentioning about the skills. So in that process, obviously there's so many skills that fold into, research and investigation, interviewing, that sort of thing. So that's we can think about the skills during these steps of the process. And we would like it to be aligned with an authentic community need. Like, we're not just making something up. Like somebody said, if you have a hammer, then everything's a nail. So like, let's say you want to do a beach cleanup, but the beach has already been picked over by the other 5 schools, then you shouldn't go do that. You should find something that is genuinely a need in your community, or with the global goals, which is why the SDGs are such good guiding principles. We really focus a lot on consulting and collaboration with the partners that you're working with. Don't assume that you know what they need. Don't assume that you're going to go in and, tell them how it's done. It should be really, really a conversation back and forth. And I'll speak again about this in a second. It's reciprocal and mutually beneficial. So to me, what that means is there's no saviorism. There's no like, look at this nice thing we're doing for you. Don't even really like to use the word help. We used to say, don't give a hand out, give a hand up. And now my friend Darcy tells me you should say, why don't we just walk hand in hand? There's no power imbalance. It should, in the long term, promote community self-reliance. So the thing you do for the community should not foster their reliance on you for that. There can be a plan for sustainability in their own right, and that takes a whole nother skill set. We can chat about that if there's time. And the reason we really think a lot about this taking place over an extended period of time is what I talked about earlier with the consultative and collaborative relationships, because it takes time to build trust with your community partners, with your stakeholders. So if you rush into something and you don't have a long-term relationship where they can tell you honestly, like, that idea is never going to work in this setting. Like, I know it sounds good, but we can't do that here for this and that reason. Sometimes that takes time to build that trusting, communicative, consultative relationship. It's informed and deeply reflective. We're really big on reflection, and Lawrence's chart showed that as well. There's reflection at every stage. For me, it's really important that we teach the kids open-heartedness and compassion, and not just the kids, the adults in the process as well. And again, to me, this is a skill that it's a skill. Like we say, oh, that child is kind, or she's so open-hearted, or he's a compassionate person. But it's my true belief that through service, kids can build habits and means to practice their open-heartedness and their compassion. And that's a skill, a social emotional skill that we're building through service. And it's ethical and sustainable. So that's, again, talking about not no saviorism and no white parachute is another word for it, where you just drop in and do this thing and then you pat yourself on the back for doing it and leave. And that can be any color parachute, really. So the ones that really stand out for me is the reciprocal and mutually beneficial. Where we've seen service and service learning go very wrong is when there's a sort of power imbalance. And I don't think it's good for the students that engage in it. And I know it's not good for the communities and the partnerships that are involved. It's really lovely to say that your service should put your service out of a job. Like, if you do it correctly, your community should no longer need you. And I talked about why I think that extended over a period of time is important, and why that open-hearted and compassionate is building these skills in our children and our teachers, frankly, or anybody. So this is just a quick example for something that you can do completely remotely. Now, I'm just going to tell you straight up that it to me is not a pinnacle of all of the key elements that I just mentioned to you, but I just took part in this. And one thing that it really struck me in helping the kids to plan this, but also to watching them kind of take the lead and run this half-day summit, was that it really promoted student ownership and purpose. So the service, like kind of council at the International School of Manila, they had some kids who wanted to talk about how to be a change online. And they came up with really interesting workshop topics like, do you engage in performative activism, also known as slacktivism? And how can you tell if that's what you're doing, and is it all bad? They talked about how to run a social media campaign for a cause that you believe in. They had an amazing keynote speaker who was a Filipina, an activist and judo champion. So I think this is a way that can be completely remote. Obviously, it's for higher grade students, but it was truly, just to me, so inspiring to watch these kids go into action. And the beauty of Zoom now also is that they invited students from other schools in the city, which before would have been really, really difficult. You have to plan for busing and lunches and security and snack time and I don't even know what all. And now it was beautiful. There was this group of students from many different schools all participating. And I was really, really impressed. And it costs zero to very little if you don't have to pay your keynote speaker, which most people will do this for free. So that was one example. And then the company that I work for, MAD, we did a little initiative on the side when COVID first hit, was that we work with an indigenous tribe called the Ayata, and during lockdown, they could not bring their produce to Manila to sell, and they were really, really struggling. So we put a call out to the students at IS Manila, and we challenged them to help us solve this problem. It's SDG 11, really. It's sustainable cities and communities, because the infrastructure of the city is broken and can't support these people. It's reduced inequalities as well. So the students watched some videos. You saw our founder, Raf, there in the video. He made some videos, and the students interviewed the staff. They asked about, like, what does MAD do and who are these people? And we gave them the whole background. And then the students, we connected them via Zoom with some of the farmers. They got to ask their farmers a little bit more about their products and what the problems were and why can't they sell their stuff. And then the students worked with us to create a marketing strategy, a little social media campaign to sell the rainforest honey. And some of the kids got really into it and did some website design, because we were selling things through a terrible, like, Excel spreadsheet, and it was a big mess. And they fixed our point of sales on the web page, and they saw that they were helping directly the indigenous people that MAD works with on a long-term basis. So that's a more complex example, but the reason I include it is because we all, generally speaking, have partnerships with people in our community that may be facing some real issues during COVID. So we want to figure out kind of what I think would be referred to as indirect service. So we weren't going and, like, actually buying their produce from them or being able to visit them in the village, but we helped them to access the market in Manila without going anywhere but online. It was completely from a remote, access point. So did we meet some of the targets? We feel like the students really gained. They got to use their skills with marketing. They found out more about the tribes and about SDG 11, and the tribe's livelihood was enhanced. So you know, just to show you that you can think about these key elements of best practice service in a very small little initiative or something a little bit more complex. So I won't read these all to you because I have a feeling I'm taking up all my time. But that was just another example. And then my last slide is that obviously at this time in October of 2020, that we really need to be realistic. We shouldn't try to meet all, you know, make our projects now meet every one of those elements. And, you know, it's not a good service learning, you know, part of the curriculum or project if it didn't meet all of them. And just, yeah, do our best, like talk to each other, support each other, give each other ideas, do our best. And, you know, because pandemic. So I think it's a good time to remember to also take care of ourselves and yeah, do our best in this situation.
Thank you for that very important reminder at the end, Suji, that we must be realistic about what we're hoping to achieve at this point in time. I think it's very important for teachers to be mindful of that and also to constantly reinforce the same with their students so that they don't feel overwhelmed or underwhelmed by either of their, you know, by the efforts that they're putting in. Thank you so much for some of those absolutely fantastic ideas, Suji, and for sharing some real-time examples of what kids have actually been able to achieve in terms of service learning over the pandemic period. There are some questions that have come in, some of these to do with service learning outcomes and how we can map these across different curriculums. So I wanted to open this out to all panelists because all three of you come from different curriculums, and I thought it'd be useful to talk about how do you go about measuring or defining what these outcomes could be for your students' service learning projects, and how do you go about measuring them and also perhaps giving feedback to students. So Lawrence, could we start with you and then we'll move on to Suji and Maipelo.
Yeah, thank you. So basically what it comes down with us, like I said earlier, we use service learning as a how and not a what. So we don't technically have a service learning assessment. Different schools do it different ways. And some schools are very good about actually creating standards and benchmarks even for service learning. We don't have that, but we do have more informal, what we call check-ins, which essentially is quite similar to what Suji was talking about in terms of kind of best practice based, but more along the lines of a rubric. All right, so the idea is for teachers themselves, potentially with a co-teacher or someone like myself, to kind of look through the actual process. And I would like to go back to what Suji was saying, which is it takes time for things to develop, right? So don't expect always the service learning experience to be absolutely perfect the very first time you try it. I'm reading these chat things on the side saying, you know, that's very difficult. And yes, it is very difficult, but you can start small and keep moving from there. So in our particular case, we use service learning. We assess the process and kind of go through the best practices piece. But it's more of a conversational assessment and making adjustments the next time we redo the unit, for example, or something like that. But as far as the actual outcomes, like assessable outcomes, they are purely the curricular outcomes. So whatever curriculum it is that we're using, that's what the kids are being kind of
assessed on.
Yeah,
okay,
assessed.
Making sense. Suji, what about you? In your experience, how are service learning measured? Do you recommend it be measured? And if yes, in what ways?
So most of the work I do now, actually in the past year, since I've been out of school and helping schools with service, some of it is done through the CAS program. And so for me, in CAS, the measure, I would say, is more about their reflection to show how they've progressed in the learning profiles and the stages. So I'm not a huge personal believer in like marking it in some way. And even CAS has let go of kind of like the hours per se. But I think that as much as it can be integrated into the curriculum, then it is naturally kind of graded or marked within that. And I think Maipelo can speak to that way better than I can.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Suji. So once you integrate service learning in the curriculum, really the learning outcomes are what's guiding the assessment. So the service learning is just the vehicle through which students are learning whatever content is being taught through the curriculum. So in my school, we do have some rubrics, but those are mostly for students to really self-assess how they are doing with implementing the service learning process, instead of just assessing the learning outcomes at the end of the experience.
Absolutely. And that brings us very quickly to the next question as well. And I think, Maipelo, you can answer this one best. We do know that the e-assessments don't measure service learning. But that said, how do we inspire in our students the desire to go out and serve the community, to learn through those experiences? Of course, we do know that the personal project has a strong component of that, particularly for the IB communities, but even for other schools where service learning is not assessed. You know, and that is across the board for a lot of schools across the world. For a lot of curriculums, service learning is not being assessed. How do we, in those situations, have students or inspire our students to actually undertake these activities? Yeah. And I think this also, in some senses, feeds into the question that Paolo was asking about what is the drive for students to engage in student learning and service learning.
Yeah. I mean, one of the activities we usually do with students before integrating service learning, we have them do a reflection just to see what they think about engaging in service learning. And most of the time they just say, well, why are we doing this? I mean, why do we need to go out of our comfort zone and go and interact with the community? And after the service experience, we have a post-action reflection to just see how their thinking has changed. And we do see a lot of difference. So to me, I think just let them reflect, let them talk it out. I mean, let's hear them expressing how they are feeling before the experience, and then also hear and see how their thinking is changing after engaging in the experience. And we did our service learning program. We started it officially 3 years ago, and we have seen a shift in the culture.
Yes.
Just a shift. So just let them be frustrated, let them be negative, but let them do the experience, and you will see the shift and the changing in the thinking about service learning.
I agree.
I agree. That, I think one of the more important things to also think about as educators is that when you want students to actually engage in service learning, it should be something that is close to their own hearts. You know, I might, as an educator, feel that it's really important to save turtles. But maybe my student feels that it's more important perhaps to first address the air pollution problem. So having kids engage in things that mean something to them personally is the first step in inculcating that drive or that incentive to do something for the community. If you're designing the community service activity, and if you're enforcing it on your students, the likelihoods of them taking it on, being engaged in it, wanting to do something for the community is far less than if they come up with something themselves. So I think that might also be an important element of this. And I do want to clarify, and this is something that somebody pointed out in the chat as well. Saurabh said that earning for the e-assessment in the MYP, it's compulsory that students are, that they complete all 7 learning objectives in order to attain the e-learning, the e-assessment certificate. You're absolutely right, Saurabh. I think that the focus here was not on whether or not it's compulsory. It was more to think about how do we get students to engage in it more willingly, as opposed to just having to complete it as a requirement for a certificate. And a lot of curriculums. Sorry, Suji, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that I think that part of the process that comes even at the very, very initial stage is exposure, because a lot of kids don't know that they care about something until they're exposed to it. So as service learning coordinators or even curriculum coordinators, I think everything that we can do to bring to a light, not just intellectually, but with compassion. Like I'm reading what some of the responses were to my scatterfall, and it's so lovely. Compassion, changing the world, empathy, selflessness, ethical choices. I don't think the kids can activate that sense of empathy and compassion and selflessness until they're exposed to something that bothers them. Yeah. And I think that's something that we can do as part of what we do in a school, is to engage and make kids aware.
Absolutely. And I know I'm mindful of the time, and I know that Maipelo still has her ideas to share. So I'm very quickly going to hand over the floor to Maipelo. I know we've eaten into your time, Maipelo. There have been so many interesting questions that have come in. So over to you.
All right, thanks. I'm just gonna share my screen. So just give me a few seconds. Sorry, just a few seconds. The technology is not cooperating. Sorry, can you just take more questions while I fix my screen?
So
Something is happening. If you'd like,
I'm happy to share your slides, Maipelo, as you get.
If you can do that, because for some reason that is just not popping up.
No worries. I will quickly share your slides.
All right.
Okay, here we are.
For now, it's still not showing from my end.
Are you able to
yes, that's good. That's better. Yes. All right. So I'm just going to be connecting to what Suji and Lawrence have said about service learning, especially as a teaching and learning strategy. All right. And the last point that Suji was making is actually one of the major standards of service learning. So I'll start off my presentation by just sharing what the National Youth Leadership Council mentions as the standards for quality practice in terms of service learning. So first thing, service learning has to be connected to the curriculum. So it's a teaching and learning strategy, all right? So that means that students are using the service experience to transfer what they are learning in an authentic context. And then second point, Pallavi touched on that. So the service experience has to be meaningful. So I think that's actually what will get the student buy-in that we are looking for in the service experience. So students should have a means to really connect with something that they are passionate about through the service experience, or they should be able to do it in a way that allows them to use their skills, their talents. So there should be some meaningful connection to whatever they are doing through the service experience. And third thing, there is a very strong reflection component when we integrate service learning in the curriculum. Now, through the reflection, students are really thinking deeply about the issue. So as they engage with the community, they're thinking deeply about the issue. They're thinking about themselves. How are they growing as learners through this service experience? And they're also thinking about the community also, and what is their relationship to the community through the service experience. And then another item that really will give the buy-in that we're looking for, youth voice and choice. So when the service experience allows students to be a major part of the planning, of the implementation, and of the reflection, then they are going to be more willing to be part of that process. So allow students to have a voice in whatever experiences they're going to have in the service learning cycle. And then diversity. So through service learning, students should be able to interact with different types of people. Students need to be aware of their biases. They need to be aware of how different, they need to be aware of the differences in the community. They need to be aware of how through our diversity, we are united, all right? So it allows them to really be more aware of their community. And then students through service learning need to be working with partnerships. So that's something that Suji mentioned. Now, the value of partnerships in service learning curriculum integration is that those partners are people that are already doing something in the community to address whatever issue that students want to work with. So through the service experience, we are actually just chipping into what is already being done. So that's what actually ensures the sustainability part of the service experience, instead of just being a one-off thing and no lasting impact in the community. So partnering with somebody that is already doing something is a way for students to learn more about the issue, and it's a way for them to have a platform to contribute to addressing the issue. And then service learning experience should allow students to monitor their progress, all right? So earlier there was a discussion on how it's not always a perfect process. So a lot of things can actually go wrong through the service learning experience. So when that happens, students should be allowed to just reflect on their action plan. They should be allowed to modify their action plan and implement a new action plan. So the goal is not a perfect product. The goal is for students to learn through interacting with the community. And finally, the service learning experience should be long enough for students to make an impact based on whatever community need they are trying to address. So some experiences are gonna be short-term because they don't need a lot of time to bring about the impact, and some are gonna have to be long-term as you need a little bit of more time to bring about the community impact, all right? Now, what are some of the ways that we take action in service learning? I just wanted to bring this out because with the current situation of remote learning, some of these ways of action are not possible. So we have 4 ways of taking action in service learning. We can have direct service, which is hands-on, going out into the community, doing things with and for the community. This is the most visible and the most attractive option of service learning, mostly for the students. But we can also have indirect service, and Suji briefly mentioned that during her presentation. This is when the service is carried at a distance from the community that is being served, but we know that whatever action is being done will impact the community. And then we can have advocacy service. This is where students are speaking for or against an issue with the end goal of trying to bring about action or change. And finally, we can have research service where students are researching information about an issue with the ultimate goal to inform or to demand action about whatever issue they are researching about. Now, out of those 4 types of action, direct service is the most difficult to do when we are learning in a remote learning environment, but the other 3, indirect, advocacy, and research, are possible. So the next slide, I'm just gonna share how we are engaging in service learning in this current learning environment through those 3 other types of service learning. All right, so now we are gonna, but before we do that, I just wanna talk about how we define community at ICSA. So my school is the International Community School of Abidjan. And this actually helped us to really make it easy for us to engage in service learning, all right? So most of the time when people think about community service, they think about taking students out of their school environment, taking them out at a distant place to do something with the community. And when we started our service learning program, that was actually a challenge for most of the teachers because they felt they needed to come up with some very creative locations where they needed to take students out to. So as a school, we had a discussion about really what is community and what layers of community can be served through the service learning experience. So we agreed that the classroom is a community and students can engage in a service learning experience that serves the classroom community. The school also is a community. We can have our local community, like the town where the school is located. We can have the national community, the country where the school is located, or the global community. So we decided that all these layers of community are actually valid members of the community that can be served through the service learning experience. What this did, it helped especially with the younger kids to be engaged in the service learning experience because they could do something that could serve the classroom or something that could serve the school and still do some impactful change in their community. All right, now some examples of exactly how we are doing it at ICSA. So starting from March, so around March until June, we were learning remotely because of lockdown due to COVID. And we decided to switch our service learning experience to really doing some indirect service through personal sustainability choices, all right? Now for this, I have a quote by Mahatma Gandhi. So be the change that you wish to see in the world. So our message for service learning during that period was students have to be the change that they wish to see in the world. And there's also another quote that I didn't put on the slides by Leo Tolstoy, that's a Russian writer. He says, everyone thinks of changing the world, but nobody thinks of changing themselves. So during our at home, our approach to service was, what can I do? What can I change about the way I do things that can be a service to the planet at the end of the day, all right? So some of the projects we did, we had a grade 6 that had a water resources unit. So their service experience was to do a home water audit. And based on their results, they shared tips with the rest of the school community of to reuse gray water in the home. So those were shared through platforms such as Flipgrid or Padlet, all right? And then in April, during Earth Day, we had the whole school community. So we had students create some Flipgrid videos, just sharing how they are being sustainable at home. So what are some of the things they are personally doing in their house that are contributing to a sustainable world? And those also were shared. So by allowing students to just look within, so most of the time when we look at service learning, we just look at helping the community, but sometimes just personal changes that we make are also a service to the world that we live in. Now, the other approach that we had to service learning, so we also engaged in service learning through global collaboration. So either by doing some digital advocacy or some research service. So research service is the one that is mostly not done as much as the others, all right? But this one is allowing students to still connect using the digital platforms that are available, especially during remote learning. So some of the things that we did for service learning under these circumstances, so we had some secondary students do a Don't Rush mask challenge. So apparently the Don't Rush was a big trend about anything, it could be any concept. So they decided to use the concept to advocate not only for the wearing of mask, but also for the proper use of mask. So they were connecting to something that was happening in the environment. And we also had students participate in some competitions that were organized by organizations such as Invest in Education. So through their art class, some students did some artworks where they were representing really what they feel about this current COVID-19 environment. And we also had students write inspirational message that were also shared to this organization. Now, this one, there was 2 parts to the service experience. So students generating their products, but also the organization was donating some money for every entry that the students did. So we had two outcomes out of the same experience. And then we had a 9th grade science class do some research on exactly how to soaps kill viruses. And through their research findings, they created some infographics that were translated in both English and French, shared with our community partners to encourage the community to wash their hands using soap. So those were the ways that we collaborated using digital advocacy and research. Now, the third way that we approach service learning, now this is currently, so that way we are doing mostly school-focused learning. So we are back in campus, but we are not able to interact with our community partners. So our current focus is just what can students do to improve certain aspects of the school environment using what they have learned in their academic classes. So some examples, we have the high school physics class that conducted a school energy audit, and they presented some of their results to the board. And then using what they have learned, they created some posters on tips for conserving energy within the school environment. And those were placed all over the campus just to remind people and to allow people to be mindful of their use of energy. And we had a kindergarten class that is doing a unit on the roles of members of the community and how they can be contributing to the community. So they decided they want to contribute by planting vegetables in our community garden, and those vegetables will be donated to some members of the community. And then we had a third grade class do an advocacy on how to, just to teach other students on how to properly use our school recycling center. And this was connected to their unit on pollution. And then the final way that we are currently engaging in service learning, so it's through indirect service to our community partners. All right. Now, as Suji mentioned earlier, this is a very challenging time to some of our community partners, and we couldn't just ignore the need that was unique as a result of this particular period. So we have had students organize materials drive just to help with some of the needs that were communicated by our community partners. So we have had drives for reusable masks, hand sanitizers, school supplies, food, clothes, to support some of our community partners. And we are in a French-speaking country, so we have had students create some audiobooks, English audiobooks, and then shared the audio clips through WhatsApp with our community partners, and also donate the books through which the audio clips were based. And WhatsApp was used to just allow the community partners to access the videos even without internet connection. So they could download the audio clips and listen to them. So these are some of the ways that we have engaged in service learning. So at the end of the day, it is possible to engage in service learning. My thing would be just start small. So start with the class community, see if there's something you can do within the class community, and then build up from there. So don't just get overwhelmed with, oh, I need to change the world. Just start small and then build up from there. So that's my little contribution to how we are engaging in service learning.
Thank you so much for that, Maipelo. It was amazing to see all the fantastic work that your school and your students are doing, especially at this very, very difficult hour where people are struggling to unpack ideas and to engage students and to make sure that they're being careful and staying safe. So those are some really, really beautiful things that your students have done. And I'm hoping that it will inspire everybody else in the audience to take a leaf from your book as well. So I know we're massively over time today, and I know that it's a holiday weekend here in India, so I'm not going to keep all of you here any longer, and I'm going to let you all go ahead and enjoy the rest of your Friday evening. But I do want to thank all the participants for all the fantastic questions that did come in today. I think we had a great conversation around what service learning should and could look like, particularly at this time of remote schooling. I would definitely encourage all participants to continue engaging with one another on our Facebook group. And of course, the panelists would be at some point in time also joining in and putting in some observations there as well. So thank you very much to all of you for having joined us today. Please do remember to send us your submissions for what you learned from this session. The link for the form is in your chat now. You all will also be able to access this form via email when you get the panelist presentations and the recordings today. You will also have access to this form via that email. The deadline for your submissions is tomorrow, 6 p.m. India time. So do make sure that you send us your reflections or your sketch notes or your activity ideas in by that time. Thank you once again to Lawrence, to Suji, and to Maipelo. Thank you very much for taking the time and for sharing your ideas around this extremely important area of teaching and learning. And thank you, participants, for being here and for being such a wonderful audience. And we look forward to having you back again next week for our weekly webinar, where we're going to be talking about how you can design interactive classroom activities. So looking forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you, participants, and have a wonderful weekend ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you.